Welcome to our very first Friday seminar this fall. And it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, our own postdoc, Dr. Bhargav Badupalli. So Dr. Badupalli got his master's degree from Indian Institute of Technology in 2014. And then he worked a couple of years for Schlumberger and the National Institute of Oceanography in India before he moved to the UK and worked with Dr. Tim Minshaw for his PhD. So during his PhD, he used 3D full waveform inversion to image the deep glacier margin with the OBS data. And that is what he will tell us today. And after getting his PhD in 2020, Bhargav moved to the US and joined us at the Institute. And he started working with me this past spring on the Cascadia imaging project. And this June and July, we went to sea together to acquire multi-channel seismic data and OBS data along the Cascadia margin offshore Vancouver Island, Washington, and Oregon. And so Bhargav will be using this data set for his postdoc work here. And without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Bhargav Badupalli. Bhargav, you can take over.
Thanks, Shosho, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. The work, this work is part of my PhD at NOC, National Oceanography Center, Southampton. In this project, I did imaging of the deep Galicia margin to understand rifting of the continents. I used active source seismic data acquired by ocean bottom seismometers, and I'd like to thank my supervisors, Tim Minshall, Gaia Bairaki, and Jonah Morgan from Imperial, and collaborators Tim Reston, Dale Saar, Guy Limer, and Dirk Kalashchan. This work wouldn't have been possible without their support. And this photograph is taken from Langseth during the cruise, and those two red dot circles are source arrays. Yeah. So the outline for today's talk is that I'm going to talk about basic introduction to rifted margins, and then geological background of the Galicia margin. Then I'm going to talk about the data a bit and the technique I have used for imaging. And I'm going to present a comparison of 2D and 3D FWI using a real data set, and then some results from 3D FWI. And also I'm going to talk about an imaging technique called mirror imaging. And at the end, I'm going to present the work plan of the Cascadia imaging project at UT. So rifting is a first order tectonic process that initiates plate tectonic cycles. And it happens in different phases. In the initial phases, there are distributed faulting and in the upper crust, and in the later phases, the extension becomes localized, and there are shear zones formed, and asthenosphere uplifting. And in the further later stages, the crust becomes very thinned to less than 5 to 10 kilometers. This is called hyperextension just before the breakup, and after the breakup, they form spreading centers. The trailing edges of the continents are called passive margins, and these margins are very important zones. They're thick sedimentary deposits, archive Earth's climate history, and they host oil and gas, and also they are one of the favorite sites for carbon capture storage. However, they pose a risk of natural hazards like landslides, for example, Storegga slide in Norwegian offshore. Rifted margins are widespread across the globe. In fact, they are one of the basic reasons what decided the shape of the present continents. And based on the magmatic activity during the rifting, they are classified as magma rich, magma poor, intermediate, and transform. The study region for today's talk is shown in this black box here, and this region got separated from Newfoundland. And yeah, so based on the magmatic activity, the rifted margins are classified between two end members. One is called magma poor margins, and other is magma rich margins. In magma poor margins, the extension happens over larger distance. The crustal thinning happens over larger distance, and the crustal thinning is also very gradual. This is usually associated with structures like detachment faults and hyperextension zone where the crust is very thin, and also exhumed mantle towards the seasides, and the occurrence of oceanic crust is further towards seawards. Whereas in magma rich margins, the thinning is very abrupt, and there are structures called SDRs, seaward dipping reflectors, which are lava flows, and the velocities in the lower crust are very high, which are interpreted as either serpentinized mantle or under magmatic underplating or magmatic intrusions. This is a debated topic. And the occurrence, and there is no exhumed mantle in magma rich margins, and the occurrence of oceanic crust is more towards, like, is abrupt and more towards land. Galicia margin, which is a steady region for today's talk, is a magma pore margin. So magma pore margins allow us for clear imaging of the structures. So they help. It's much easier to understand rifting processes in magma pore margin. So as I told, this is the map of West Iberia margin, as this is here in Spain. And as I told, it's a magma pore margin, and there are very less evaporates and very thin sedimentary covers. So all these factors support very deep imaging, and hence we can see the structures very clearly. This margin is very extensively studied with a lot of different types of geophysical data, like previously done a lot of seismic data, and also there are a lot of drilling data. So studying this margin has contributed a lot to the understanding of rifting process. In this margin, the rifting happened in multiple phases. In the initial phase, the rifting happened in the formation of the basins in the proximal domain, the closer to the coast. And then the rifting in the later phases, the rifting shifted to Galicia interior basin. And also at the same time, it began in Galicia, deep Galicia margin. But in the final stages, the rifting abandoned Galicia interior basin and got focused in deep Galicia margin, and the final breakup happened in deep Galicia margin. The southern Iberian abyssal plate is just below the deep Galicia margin, and the crustal structures in these two margins is very similar. This region also has the similar structure as deep Galicia margin. The study region for today's talk is this G3D, which is in where a high resolution 3D seismic volume has been acquired in 2013. And the reason why for acquiring this 3D volume was that for the first time, the scientists wanted to study the rifted margins in 3D because the fault blocks which comprise the crust in rifted margins are three-dimensional in nature. So that helps in answering many questions about rifting process. The Galicia 3D experiment, in Galicia 3D experiment, multi-channel data were acquired from using Marcus Langseth, and OBSs were deployed and recovered using from Poseidon in 2013. This here is the map of the study region, and there were 100 shooting lines which were shot, and the shots were recorded using 4 6-kilometer long streamers, and OBSs sitting on the seafloor. The numbered dots here are the OBSs, and the ones with the green color are the ones which were used for full waveform in the imaging full waveform inversion. The ones in the yellow had either bad quality data or no recording, so they were not used. The data from the OBSs in the north top line were not used because there were larger uncertainties assigned to were larger uncertainties in their locations because there were no shooting profile on top of them. However, they were used in some other studies. And the grid dimensions for this study is the 78 kilometers in the east-west direction that is shown in the red dash line, and the 22 kilometers in the north-south line. And the time migrated profile of the reflection volume is shown here, highlighting the different geological packages. So between the dashed blue line and the dashed red line is pre and synref packages, and between the dashed red line and the black dashed line, which is S reflector, is the basement crystalline crust. And towards the west is the peridotite ridge, that is serpentinized mantle. Yeah. So here, this is a snapshot of the data from the OBS along one of the shooting profiles. we can see very clear S arrivals coming from the S reflector from the mantle, and there are crustal arrivals, and these are the direct, this is the water arrival and the reflections. And there are also, because it's the seafloor is very deep, we are also able to see first order multiples separated very well from the primary reflections. So yeah, in this study we are primarily, we'll be using we only using the refraction data, wide angle data, and also first order multiples for mirror imaging. So this is the model of the deep Galicia margin developed from the 3D seismic volume. Towards west is the sea, and towards east is the land. And the different geological units are shown in different colors. The crystalline basement is shown in blue, in pink, sorry, and above it are the different synrift and pre-rift packages. And there are faults which are the crystalline crust is brittle and coupled, and there are faults that are cutting through the crust and reaching the reflector called the detachment fault, which is called S reflector in Galicia. And this reflector separates the crust from the mantle, serpentinized mantle. So during rifting, it is proposed that the water traveled from was transported to the mantle through these faults, and it serpentinized the mantle below. So there was during the extension rifting process, during the rifting, these fault blocks are rotated on the top of this detachment fault, and also the detachment fault was active at low angles. And further evidence for this rotation was obtained when they have seen aligned corrugations on the fault planes with the corrugations on the S reflector. So this is the S surface, and the corrugations were very well aligned, which means that there was a slip between of the fault blocks on top of the S surface. Yeah. So going into about the mantle serpentinization, it is proposed that serpentinization happened during rifting, and Bairaki et al., using the OBS data from the Galicia 3D experiment, developed a 3D travel time model, and they proposed that the water traveled through the faults, and they calculated the amount of water that went into the mantle and caused the amount of percentage of serpentinization. So the dashed S line, the dashed line here is the S reflector, and the black solid lines are the faults. And they found that there is a positive correlation between the heaves of the faults and the water volume supplied to the mantle, that is serpentinization. However, the interpretations they used were from 2D, that is this correlation is primarily based on the 2D profiles. The 3D data was not used in their study. Korinaga 2017 suggested that the velocity reduction in mantle is not primarily due to serpentinization, but due to residual fracture porosity. So with all these unanswered questions, to understand rifting better, we propose to do a high resolution velocity model of the deep Galicia margin. So to develop the high resolution velocity model, we opted a technique called full waveform inversion. So traditionally in academia, travel time tomography is more common, in which only the travel time information, like just the arrival times of the waveforms are used, but not the complete waveform. But in full waveform, the whole complete waveform information is used for inversion, and we generate that generates a high resolution of the subsurface. So FWI is an iterative process, and that iteratively minimizes the misfit function and tries to fit the synthetic data to the field data. Since it's an advanced technique, it requires a starting model, and usually the starting model is taken from travel time tomography. And the model update is usually calculated by taking cross correlation between the forward wave field and the residual wave field. This method is called adjoint method. And this technique is highly nonlinear. That means the change in output is not proportional to the change in input, and it's computationally very demanding, because we can see it here, like to compute one model update between one pair of source and receiver required to calculate a forward wave field and residual wave field, store them, and to cross correlation. So it requires a lot of computation power and lot of memory. One famous problem with with FWI is the cycle skipping problem. So this occurs when the predictor data, when the model predictions are not really close to the actual data. Since so here the dashed line is model predicted data, and the solid line is the field data. So in case if the predicted data is out of phase of the field data by say half a cycle, then the FWI will try to match nth wiggle with the n+1 wiggle, and then it leads into a wrong solution. Whereas if you see in case of this bottom predicted line and the date and the data, actual data, the nth wiggle is within the half a cycle, and in that case FWI will match the nth wiggle with the nth wiggle, and in that case the model will converge into right solution. So this is a problem of cycle skipping with FWI. FWI has a lot of different components. So and all of them are very important. The first important component is a starting velocity model, and in our case we derived our starting velocity model from travel time tomography of first arrivals. It's very important that the model should be able to predict the data within half a cycle. Otherwise there will be the problem of cycle skipping. So we tested the starting model for its ability to predict the data within half a cycle. And the next important thing is the starting frequencies. It's always said that to start the inversion from as low frequencies as possible. And we have used some phase values of the first arrivals to decide our starting frequencies. And we conducted some test runs to see which is the best starting frequencies. I'll be talking about the starting frequency in the next slide in more detail. And we derived the source wavelet is also very important. The source wavelet should be able to predict the data, and we derived our source wavelet from the direct water arrivals. And the data we inputted into the inversion is wide angle refraction data recorded by hydrophones. And before we filtered the data with bandpass with using a bandpass filter. And we performed acoustic full waveform inversion, and we inverted at 5 frequencies, increasing from 3 hertz to 5.2 hertz. And these are the model size, and the grid spacing for our model was 550 meters in all 3 directions. And at each iteration, we applied some smoothing to suppress artifacts, and we performed 30 iterations at each frequency. So in total, it was 150 iterations for full inversion. So yeah, talking about the starting frequencies are very important. So for deciding about starting frequencies, we use something called phase plots. So in this phase plot, this is the phase plot for one OBS data at a 2.7 hertz. So in this phase plots, the OBS is sitting here, is at the center, and we removed the this is the top view of the OBS data, like viewing from the top, and we removed all the reflections. So this area is empty, and we have only refractions. And we extracted at each shot location the first arrivals, and using a Gaussian filter, and we applied a Fourier transform and extracted the phase at the given frequencies. So we did this at 2.7 hertz, at 3 hertz for both observed data, synthetic data. The general rule is that the phase change should be the phase change should be concentric in nature, like seen here. And when the data quality is good, when the data quality is poor, they tend to become more chaotic, like how we can see here at the 15 kilometers offset. So data beyond 15 kilometers tends to be more chaotic, because at these offsets, the noise from the previous shot is coming. So we calculated the residuals by taking the difference between the observed and the synthetic, and we see that the residuals are mostly in this region, bluish. So, and at both the frequencies at 2.7 and 3 hertz, the residuals are almost similar. So it was like it is difficult to choose the starting frequency from here. So we performed some test runs, and we decided to start the inversion from 3 hertz, because there was not much difference of starting inversion from 2.7. So we wanted to save time, computation time. So the details of this test runs are given in this in our publication. So you can check that for details, more details. Quality control is very important during FWI. So we again, because we want to make sure that inversion is progressing in the right direction. So we again made use of residual phase plots to track the inversion. So we plotted residuals using the starting model, and we plotted residuals after the first iterations. And we expect the change in the phase where residuals is more gradual rather than any jumps. So at 3 hertz, we see that the change is like here, it's more bluish, and then it tends to be slightly more bluish, but also slightly more like greenish, but there are some blue areas. And the residuals with the final model are mostly green. And this kind of shows that the transition is more like a gradual one, and which is the right one. And at 4.5 hertz, we see that almost the same thing, but there are certain regions which show the more drastic change, like for example, which are highlighted in this red boxes. The change is from red to blue, which is from pi to minus pi. That means that these areas have cycle skipped. But however, since we are starting our inversion from 3.7 hertz, these changes are more gradual. So that means that this is an advantage. This is one advantage of starting the inversion from lower frequencies, that we can avoid cycle skipping at higher frequencies. Another quality control what we performed is that we compared the data itself, the observed and synthetic data, by plotting them side by side in a set of 10 traces. So the observed data is banded in this is colored in this band, and the synthetic data is in white. So we see that the synthetic data is predicted using travel time model, and the observed data is predicted using FWI model. Sorry, the synthetic data in this panel is predicted using FWI model. So we see in this panel, this is data from one OBS along one profile, and there are small misfits in this case, which are corrected by FWI in this case, and the same is true with also in this case. In B and D, there is a small misfits in this case, and which get corrected in this by FWI. So this again shows that the FWI has done a good job. And finally, we validated our data by overlaying it on the time slice. This is the time slice at a depth of 100 milliseconds below the average S reflector, and we can see the S reflector is here in this case. And we overlaid our velocity model on that, and we see that the velocity model, there is a velocity change along the S reflector, and yeah, this is very well constrained. And also not just that, even within the crust, we see there is a reflection, and we see the FWI has kind of constrained this boundary also very well with the change in velocities. So so now the comparison between 2D and 3D FWI. In general, the difference between 2D and 3D imaging is not so large in case of the very closely sampled data sets. But in case of sparsely acquired data set, like in this study, like with very large OBS spacing, the difference can be noticeable or significant. But 2D FWI's 2D wide-angle acquisitions using sparsely spaced OBSs are widely common in academia, and but the FWI is they are not really used in FWI because of the problem of data sparsity that can lead to failure of the inversion. So in this case, we applied FWI to sparsely acquired data sets, partly as a data set from Galicia margin, and we tried to highlight the difference between 2D FWI and 3D FWI, and also 2.5D. So we select for this case, we selected the data for 2D along the profile which is shown in this box, black box, with and only using the instruments with using for 2D we use just the two shooting intervals directly above these instruments, We used data from only the green ones and pink ones, the yellow ones were not used. For 2.5D, we used all the shots in the full volume, but only the instruments in this box. Whereas for 3D, we used all the green colored instruments and all the shots from the volume. So the major, I want to take your, for comparison, I would like to take your attention to 5.25 contour and 6.5 contours. So in case of 3D, we see that these contours follow very well the top of the crystalline crust, and the 6.5 contour follows the S reflector quite well. Whereas in case of in case of 2D, this contour is kind of like it's following okay, but it's not really following very well. And in case of S reflector, we see that there is a lot of undulations at the S reflector, and also within the crust, we see that in 2D reflection there are like circular features which are not real, and these circular features are absent in 3D. And these circular features are basically are resulting from poor constraints of from sparsely spaced OBSs, and they are not real. In case of 2.5D, the fit is better than 2D, but it is not as good as 3D. So the 2D FWI assumes that there is no structural variations along the strike, and it is the only variation is is in the dip direction. Whereas the 3D has the advantage of considering the variations along the strike, and there are actually variations along the strike in drifted margins. And because of this assumption, the difference because of such an assumption, it gets only exaggerated in case of sparsely spaced OBSs. So in all, it says that the 3D data set mitigates the effect of receiver sparsity in FWI imaging. Another interesting thing is data fit. So we used three OBSs to illustrate the data fit, and for 3 cases, that is 2D case, 2D case, 2.5D case, and 3D case. So in case of OBS 45, there is not much. The RMS fits for all the 3 cases is very close, and also for OBS 46, the RMS fit is for very close. So in this case, the closer offsets are here to the OBS, and the offsets increase in this direction. And here the the closer offsets are here, and the offsets increase in both the directions. And for this OBS, the closer offsets are here, and the offsets increase in this direction. So, but however, but the difference between the RMSs is so close in these 2 cases, in these 2 OBSs, that it's really difficult to say which is fitting the best. However, it becomes interesting in case of 38. The OBS 38 has larger uncertainties due to its because of its larger time corrections which were applied to the data in the raw data. So we expect that this data shows less fit. The 3D shows larger misfit, whereas in case of 2D it shows very good fit and significantly lower than 3D. So this suggests that 2D FWI can be prone to overfitting, and yeah, which we should be careful of in case of sparse data set. Another interesting thing is the deeper imaging. So we calculated the velocity perturbations for 2D FWI, 2.5D FWI, and 3D FWI. And we see that the velocity perturbation, the blue anomalies below the S reflector, the dashed line is the S reflector, is progressively increasing from 2D to 2.5D and 3D. So these we also performed some synthetic tests to recover these anomalies, results of which are given in this publication. So this suggests this shows that the 3D has stronger constraints at deeper depth, and that is because of more data is kind of turning from more turning waves are coming from these depths, and the 3D problem is better constrained. So moving to the 3D interpretations, here are the 3 profiles which are the closest to the 3 OBS lines which I have shown previously. And the red solid lines are the fault blocks, and the interpretations are the same. That is, the dashed blue line is the top of the is the base of the post drift, The dashed red line is the top of the crystalline crust, and dashed black line is the S reflector. So we constrain the nature of the crust by looking at the velocity ranges. So the velocity range between the dashed red line and the S reflector ranges from 4.75 to 6.7, with mean velocity of 6 kilometers per second. This mean velocity is very close to the average velocities of the rifted margins across globally, and 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 we compare this range of this range 4.75 to 6.7 of the crystalline crust compares very well with the uh, southern Iberian abyssal plain extended crust, hyper extended crust of 5 to 6.6. And also the limits of the crustal velocity limits are within the velocity limits of crust in deep Galicia interior basin, where at the center of the rift the crustal thickness is 8 kilometers, and there Perez Gusenia et al. Were able to identify separate upper crust and lower crust. So considering that the top of the lower crust in Galicia so we can assuming that the top of the lower crust is 6.6 also in Galicia from Galicia interior basin, we see an interesting observation is that the lower crustal rocks is kind of shallow up at the fault intersections along the faults. Like we see that wherever there is fault intersection, the 6.6 contour kind of shallows within the footwall blocks along the faults. We interpret this as a similar thing has been also observed in Galicia interior basin, and we interpret this as the exhumation of the lower crust beneath the footwalls to accommodate the extension. So as the extension happened in the initial stages, the lower crust which is ductile in nature exhumed along these faults to accommodate the extension. And these blocks are actually are quite big, like they go high as 1 kilometers, like for example here in this case pointed by white arrow, here and here and here and here. So these blocks, the likelihood of them being serpentinized mantle is very less. Another interesting evidence to support this comes from southern Iberian abyssal plain. So this is a seismic section from White Marsh et al. 2000. So it's an old paper. So the quality of this figure is not so great. There are 3 reflectors, that is S reflector, and there is a H reflector, and there is F reflector. Our interest is in this region, that is the H reflector, which is a detachment fault in this region. So if you zoom in further into this, there are 3 drilling data available in this region, and from the 1068 drilling data, they have recovered serpentinized mantle, which is below the H reflector. So H reflector is detachment, and it is expected that below it there is serpentinized mantle. Whereas in 900, from the drilling data of 900 and 1067, they have recovered lower crustal rocks, which is lower crustal rocks. So to explain these lower crustal rocks, White Marsh et al. Suggested that from where did these rocks come? So they explained it. Their model suggests that initially it was this was the structure of the margin, and there was a fault, steep dipping normal fault in this region, which brought the rocks from the location where the fault intersects with the detachment to a shallower depths. So these what the correspondence, these are the regions from where we are also claiming that in deep Galicia margin there is lower crustal rocks. So these corresponds very well with our claim of having lower crustal rocks just below the footwall blocks and exhuming along the faults. So now moving further down at the S reflector, the figure here shows the S reflector in depth from the multi-channel seismics, and the solid black lines are the fault intersections. And the dashed land 5.4.1 is the fault that doesn't show clear reflections cutting the S. And this is the velocity model at the S reflector, derived from 3D FWI, and the boxes here show that the regions that show very good correlation between the regions with features of between the features on the S reflector and the FWI model. This correlation between the highs on the S surface, high reliefs on the S surface, and the lower velocities on the FWI map suggest that there has been serpentinization, that is the water was traveling down to the mantle and it hydrated the rocks, and serpentinization causes the increase in the volume, and this resulted in the upward expansion of the rocks. So this correlation also suggests that the reduction in the mantle velocities is most likely due to serpentinization, but and less likely due to residual fracture porosity. If we move down further into the mantle, 100 milliseconds below the S reflector, this is the velocity model derived from 3D FWI, and we calculated serpentinization maps. Scuba et al. 2019 predicted the velocities below the S reflector by training a machine learning algorithm. So for training that, they have used velocities from 2D FWI line. The location of the line is shown in the red line here, and they tried to use the properties from 3D reflection volume and try to predict the velocities across the volume. We see in fact no correlation between the two maps, and that is probably because the machine learning algorithm was not able to capture the structural variation across the whole volume from just one line. And also their map shows a very close correlation with one of their input features, that is the crustal thickness of the crystalline crust. Like we see that it shows quite close correlation with the structures from the thickness. That means it is probably more biased to one of the input parameters. So focusing on the serpentinization map from the 3D FWI, we see that there are regions where the structures align very well with the fault intersections. For example, here in this region, there is this dark blue thing which aligns very well with this fault 6.4, and also this fault here 5.4.1 aligns pretty well with the structure here, and also like 5.4, and along like other faults we see there is some kind of alignment, but not so very tight. So based on this, we say that this alignment is only possible when the motion of the faults on the top of the S reflector has stopped, that is the rifting has been stopped, and the faults have become stationary, and the water and there was still some water going down through the faults and caused this, and this has caused serpentinization patterns which have overwritten the syn rift patterns. So what we propose initially, it is proposed that serpentinization is only happened during syn rifting, but we say that it is a continuous process, and it continued into a post rifting phase as well. And we revisited the problem of heaves and serpentinization patterns. So, and we kind of calculated the average heaves and serpentinization using the corrugation lines, that is the direction of the corrugation lines. So the green lines are the directions of the corrugation lines from the 3D volume, and the black lines are the fault intersections of the S reflector. And we calculated average serpentinization in the footwall direction, 1 kilometer, and of the hanging wall direction 1 kilometer. So the red lines is 1 kilometer away from the fault intersection in the hanging wall direction, and the magenta is 1 kilometer away in the footwall direction. So we averaged out the heave values and serpentinization values for each fault and plotted them. The error bars here show the variations in the serpentinization values and the heave values, and we see that on both the sides we see very poor correlations. So we attribute this poor correlation is probably due to complex faulting, the unrecognized faulting. And this and this contradicts the result of Gaia Bairaki. And the last thing, and another thing which we did is the mirror imaging. This is the migration of first order multiples. So OBS data traditionally are only used for developing velocity models and due to their very sparse spacing, they are not used for generating seismic images using migration algorithms. But however, first order multiples which have wider coverage, wider illumination of the subsurface can be used for mirror image, can be used for migration. So here in this figure, the yellow triangle is OBS and the red star is the source. So the primary rays is shown as green, which goes down into the subsurface and gets reflected, whereas the multiples are bouncing off from the. There are two multiples. One bounces off from the sea surface, and one bounces off from the sea surface and is recorded is bounces out closer to the source, and one is a multiple which bounces off closer to the receiver. So this is called the receiver multiple, and this is called the source multiple. So with small assumption of saying by making a small amendment in the change in the setting, saying that assuming that the receiver is mirror image with respect to the sea surface and also the sea floor, we can consider this receiver side multiple as a primary wave and use into the migration. So this is the image which we developed along the 2D line, along the 2D FWI line, and we used the 3D. We used the travel time model to do this, and this is the image of multi-channel seismic image 3D, and we see that the first thing is that we can use OBSs to generate images here. Though the quality of the image is not so great, but we are still able to, we can still see the top of the basement is well imaged. And this technique can kind of become like a standard processing technique in studies where there are no multi-channel data. And we also performed depth imaging. So even for depth imaging, this is the depth image of the multiples, depth migration. And this is the migration using the primaries, and we see that there is no proper image. That is because the primaries do not cover larger parts, and they are very their illumination is very narrow compared to the multiples. So in summary of this talk is that difference between 2D and 3D FWI is significant. Using a sparse data set, 2Ds can generate more artifacts compared to 3D. And also that 2D FWI can be prone to overfitting using a sparse data. The hyper thin crystalline crust of DGM is comprised of lower and upper crustal rocks, and the lower crustal rocks have exhumed beneath the footwall blocks along the faults to partly accommodate extension in the early stages of the rifting. The velocity reductions in the upper mantle is primarily due to serpentinization, and this causes localized upward expansion of the rocks. And the serpentinization at DGM has commenced during rifting, and it progressed into a post-rifting phase before the faults got seized. And finally, the OBSs can be used to generate seismic images using mirror imaging. And now I want to in brief talk about my work at UTIC. So I joined UTIC as a postdoc in March, working with Shosho on the project Cascadia. So here is the figure which shows the Cascadia subduction zone, where John de Fuca plate is subducting beneath the American plate, North American plate, and there is a 1,000 kilometer long megathrust fault. So the megathrust faults are known for are causing very big earthquakes. So the last earthquake in Cascadia happened, megathrust earthquake happened in 1700 with a magnitude predicted greater than 9. And the recurrence interval for this margin is 300 to 500 years. That is, there is a very likely chance that in the next few decades there can be a very massive earthquake. So given the population, the density of population living in these cities, an earthquake in this region can be a very fatal. And so it is to mitigate the risk of from the earthquake, it's very important we understand the structures and also the subduction process here. So to understand the subduction in a better way, we recently were at sea carried out a seismic experiment. The Yeah, so we acquired during this experiment, we acquired ultra long multi-channel data with 12 to 15 kilometer offset streamers. And we also acquired a few OBS ocean bottom seismometer lines along with gravity and magnetic data. Our team comprised of scientists from Lamont, Woods Hole, University of Washington, and Oregon State University. So yeah, and we almost covered the entire margin. We collected 19 dip lines and 6 along dip line profiles. So yeah, a lot of data. So the aim of my work at UT is going to be like in 2012. I'll be looking at the sediment properties of the subduction zone, and in 2000, using the 2012 data, Han et al. 2017 suggested a link between sediment consolidation and megathrust locking with over consolidated sediment corresponding to strong locking in Washington coast, and under consolidated sediments in offshore Oregon corresponding to reduced locking with elevated pore pressures. However, these profiles were quite far separated, and there were only 3 profiles. So with this new data set, I aim to understand the change variations in sediment properties across and along the margin using more closely spaced 2D lines. Yeah, so this is the profile. These are the velocity profiles from the previous studies. Yeah. And so this is the work plan which I want to for the Cascadia project. So this is we have the 2D data set. So there will be seismic imaging done and by the ion geophysical, I think, and then we are going to devise high resolution velocity models. And I'm going to use these high resolution velocity models to perform some Bayesian rock physics inversion. And with the seismic images also, I'm going to do some thermal modeling and combine these both to study the sediment properties of Cascadia.
Okay, thank you, Bhargav, for the nice talk. Now we have time for some questions. If you have questions, you can either raise your hand or type in the chat box, and you can ask Bhargav. So any questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please go ahead, Myrtle.
Yeah, Bhargav, you mentioned that 2D is more prone to overfitting.
Yeah.
But I thought in 3D you have more degrees of freedom, so you're more likely to overfit the data in 3D than in 2D. So
Well,
I was wondering what was your rationale behind that comment?
I think in case of sparsely spaced OBS data, the 2D is less constrained, and there are like it kind of like it has more degree of freedom, I feel, and it kind of overfits the data like yeah. Whereas in case of 3D, there is constraints from more OBSs. So even if one OBS is out of like say has bad data, the other OBSs around it kind of tries to constrain it in put harder constraints on the problem and try to see that it doesn't overfit. Whereas in 2D case, there is very less data. So if one bad data, it's not really very properly constrained, and the inversion kind of takes it in some direction and overfits it. So that is probably, I think, is happening. That is what is happening in case of sparse data set.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have more questions for Bhargav? Well, I have a question. So you mentioned that from your 3D data, you found there is poor correlation between the fault heaves and the percentage of serpentinization. That is it's different from what has been found from 2D profiles by Bayarki 2016. Could you explain a bit more about why from your data set you find like poor correlation? Well, from their study, it looks like the line is a pretty nice linear correlation between.
Okay, yeah, actually the thing is like the faulting, there is a argument like serpentinization of the mantle is depending on the faulting patterns depending on the faulting patterns of the crust. So the water is flowing through the crust, and those faults which are connecting the top of the crust to the mantle are formed in a very complicated way. So there is a debate in the formation of these faults. So there is one mechanism which says there is a lot of polyphase faulting, which says that there is very complicated network of faults which are very difficult to track or like mark, or there's also some unrecognized faulting. And there is one school which says that the faulting goes on like sequentially one after the others. So 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 it is not, it's totally depending upon how the fault formation is there. And it is like if there is I mean, it's difficult to have such a kind of correlation, I feel sometimes, because in case of rifting case, the faulting is so complicated, like in the sense there is a lot of variation in the faulting. So I don't think there is such a kind of good correlation. Maybe along that line there was some kind of correlation, but when I plot, and they have used only just 2D lines, and whereas I'm using a lot more data points with a lot more number of heaves and a lot more number of faults, the data is completely spread out, and the correlation is not really, we don't really see such a kind of correlation. So it's basically because of the complex nature of faulting, I feel.
Okay, yeah, then it sounds like for their earlier study, they chose a representative line, and then with your 3D data,
yeah,
you actually have more found more complex faulting styles that kind of then make the correlation not.
And also it can
obvious.
depend on other factors, like say the connectivity of faults, the permeable, like how well the fault zones are permeable, and it can vary a lot from fault to fault. So yeah, so it is quite complicated thing to say, like, yeah, what exactly is controlling it.
Okay.
And also they have very less number of data points, like 8 data points, and you cannot really say like there is a like linear relationship between it using 8 data points. Difficult to say sometimes.
All right. It looks like Andrew Gaze has a question.
Bhargav, thanks for the talk. I'm curious if you saw any evidence of azimuthal anisotropy in the Galicia data set, and if that was maybe influenced in any way by the tectonics or the reflectors and units that you saw.
Yeah, well, they did some initially before doing the travel time tomography, they did check for some anisotropy, azimuthal anisotropy, and they didn't really find anything. So that kind of like then in that case they really like they did just the normal isotropic things, and also if there was some anisotropy, I would have noticed it when we were doing the FWI itself, because we would have seen some mismatch between the arrivals, calculated arrivals and predicted arrivals and the data in general. So, but we didn't really see that. So probably there is not really strong anisotropy. Yeah, maybe there might be something, but not very strong, like in general, like in whole, yeah.
Thanks.
Do we have more questions for Bhargav? Okay. Well, if not, let's just thank Bhargav again for the talk. And if you want to meet with him, there are still some spots available time to meet with him this afternoon. So I will post the link in the chat box. So if you're interested, you can meet with Bhargav and talk more about his research. Okay, thank you everyone.
Bye-bye.